In this lesson, we're going to learn how to work much faster inside of NUKE by setting the bounding boxes for our 3D renders. So I've just opened up 05_begin, and we just have a normal 3D render out of Maya. Now, the bounding box is what NUKE sees as the pixels it needs to work on. So in the bottom right, we have the frame. So in this case, it's 960 by 538. And in the top right, we have the bounding box, which again, in this case, is the full frame. However, the pixels we're working with only make up a small subsection of our frame. So what happens is NUKE is actually running the nodes we apply to it on all of these black pixels, and it slows NUKE down considerably, especially for expensive nodes like, let's say, our directional blur. If we bump this up to a pretty high blur length, we can see it takes forever, a couple seconds, to come in and update our viewer. And worse still, we've increased the size of our bounding box to 1.3K by about 1K. And again, all of this is to process these pixels that occupy maybe a 400 by 400 pixel radius. So what we're doing right now is we're wasting a whole lot of time on pixels that we can just ignore. So to fix this, we can use one of two methods to automatically generate a bounding box. Now, if you want to just create a bounding box, you can drop in something like the crop node, and that will let you crop in certain pixels. So if we left-click and drag this down to where we think, let's see, this sets our bounding box for us, and now our directional blur runs much faster, as we can see here. However, it does not, of course, take into the account the animation or the movement of our object. So instead of having to animate the crop tool, we can use the curves tool to generate that crop data for us. And it sounds a little strange using something called the curves tool to generate crop data, and actually the curve tool can do an incredible amount of things. It's one of the most powerful nodes inside of NUKE. And if we jump to the curve tool and add it in, we can see we can generate different curve types. So we can get the average intensities, the exposure, the max and minimum luminance, or an auto crop. So let's switch this over to auto crop and click go. It's asked us what frame, so let's just do the whole sequence. And as we can see, it runs through incredibly fast. And this, of course, depends on the size of your frame and whether you're pulling it locally or all of those things. But as you can see, it ran in 5 seconds or less. And now we have this auto crop data that is keyframed exactly where our color information is. So let's just control click and drag this onto, onto our softness, but let's drag this onto our bounding box. And so what it's going to do now is it's automatically going to come in and with this crop here, set our bounding box depending on what color information we have in our render. So now, instead of processing all of this extra information, we're only processing the pixels inside of this bounding box. And this is a really great time saver, especially for expensive tools like the directional blur. I mean, just take a look at how much faster this is. It's updating in less than a second, and we can actually hit play now, and it will be updating based on the new bounding box. And instead of creating such a huge image, we're now only creating the size of an image that we actually need. So if we lower this down, we can see that we can play through this much faster than we could before. And this is again because we set the bounding box appropriately and we're only working with the pixels that we need to. So whenever you are working with 3D renders that are not taking up the full frame, it's really important to come in and use this workflow to build ourselves an automated crop. So again, NUKE can focus on what it needs to and ignore everything else. Now I mentioned there's a second method of doing this, and this can actually take place when you're re-rendering your 3D renders into EXR files. And so let's just take a look at that. Let's hit the W key to drop in a right node, and let's give this a path. So I'm just going to move this into my project files and footage, and actually, let's see here. I actually have a folder set up already inside of the Infiltrator Beauty, cropped. Just going to render this. And inside of our EXR options, we have an auto crop option. And this only comes up with EXRs. It's just one of the file formats, or one of the great things about EXRs and NUKE is that we can have NUKE auto-generate the crop whenever we hit render. So I'm just going to hit F7 to render this node, and we can see it, of course, renders depending on how fast your system is. But what it's doing is it's also going in and creating a cropped version. So if we now read this in, I just double-click this and read the file. So it's giving us an error here. Let's just drop in a read node and import this cropped information. We can see that now our EXR files that we just generated have that crop built in. So this is another just super fast way to auto-generate this crop information. And if we look at the size of these two sequences, we can see that auto-cropping actually saves us around 4 megs, which in the big scheme of things doesn't seem like a lot, but in this case it's about 30% of our file has been removed by just using the auto crop for this scene. So if you want, you can set up this curve tool and this crop to be a tool set. So you can just select these two and go to your tool sets and click create. And I've already set mine up as curve crop. So if I just type in curve, just drop in curve crop, and it already has the expression set up. So all I need to do is connect it in, click go, and I will have my auto crop set up in just 2 clicks. So as you can see, tool sets, one of the new features in the newer versions of NUKE, great way to speed up our workflow and our entire process. Okay, so in this lesson we took a look at various ways of auto-cropping and how much time it can save us, especially with expensive nodes like the various blurs, which usually take a long time to process on a full-frame image. If we can focus NUKE down using the crop tool and a bounding box, we can save a lot of time while we're working.